3 decades. That's how long it took for the supposed cultural and creative elite in Hollywood to figure out how to make a great video game adaptation. Now I know there are people who love the original Mortal Kombat, the first Silent Hill movie, and the original Super Mario Bros. Movie, apparently. And that's great. I genuinely celebrate that love. My point, though, is that those movies weren't universally praised by audiences and critics in the same way that Arcane, or The Last of Us, or Castlevania were. To give the devil their due, though, adapting video games is uniquely difficult compared to adapting a book, even though it should not have taken 3 decades to get the formula right. It's especially difficult when the game you want to adapt has a story that is so wedded to and dependent on the gameplay structure. This is why, when I heard that one of my top 20 favorite games of all time, NieR Automata, was getting an anime adaptation, I was as excited as I was trepidatious. One of the big reasons why the story of NieR Automata works so well is because its narrative structure is so unconventional, even for a video game. The most relevant example is that the first half of the game's story is basically the first quarter done twice, just with additional information introduced the second time around, which is something you simply can't do in any other form of media. Of course, any NieR fan will say, well, just synthesize the 2 routes so you get all the information at once in the anime, and that's exactly what the anime did and was right to do. However, by doing that, you greatly risk gutting a theme that lies at the heart of both NieR Automata and NieR Replicant, which is appearances versus reality. You need Route A to withhold information about certain characters and events so the gamer can make snap judgments, only for Route B and the subsequent routes to continuously betray those judgments and, in turn, induce a reflective philosophical mindset. Then the player is left to brood on those thoughts as they run around the empty landscape, with only your pod and/or fellow android to alleviate any encroaching feelings of melancholic isolation and existential dread. For that reason, amongst many others, I was very skeptical about the adaptation. Nonetheless, I kept a pilot light of optimism going due to Yoko Taro's involvement as a creative consultant. Plus, I had faith that the power of the original story would allow viewers of the anime to forgive a variety of potential mistakes. So, was my faith validated? Did NieR Automata's complicated story structure make the transition into a passive linear viewing experience? Well, I'll say this. The anime contains enough of the heart of the original story, alongside some solid action, Easter eggs for mega fans, and some good old-fashioned Yoko Taro charm, humor, and philosophy that I am inclined to recommend it. However, I only make that recommendation to people who are pre-existing fans of the source material. If a newcomer to the world of NieR were to ask me if the anime is a good substitute for playing the game, the answer is absolutely not. In trying to adapt a 30 to 40 hour game into an 8-hour anime, while also trying to include a number of new elements, NieR Automata version 1.1a often feels like it is struggling to breathe. It seems to prioritize depicting as many events from the game as it can without allowing those moments to have their emotional and existential resonance. Due to this, the anime has a very inconsistent sense of pace, and often a very jarring sense of tone, where it will briskly shift from a very brief moment of philosophical introspection to an action sequence, from dark seriousness to slapstick comedy, and not even in the good Yoko Taro way. The ultimate result is an adaptation that is not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but one that is frustrating, because I can see the seeds of what made the game brilliant trying to emerge in a new and exciting form. If only the anime could have had 6 to 12 more episodes to deepen the characterization, the philosophical themes, and showcase how rich the lore of the NieR universe is, then it could have easily been something to not just rival the game, but, in some ways, maybe surpass it. Now, unfortunately, at this point, I cannot elaborate any further without spoiling key events from both the game and the anime. If you're a NieR Automata fan and have not watched the anime yet, I do recommend checking it out, because there's a decent amount of enjoyment to be had and a number of surprises that you don't want to spoil for yourself. Finally, if you end up liking this video, make sure to hit the like button, and maybe consider subscribing so you don't miss out on upcoming videos centered on the Drakengard/NieR universe. Now, let's begin. Though some of my complaints about the series are relevant to the first half, they are mostly felt in the second half. The first 12 episodes, on the whole, are quite good, with the first few episodes being excellent. I mean, sure, the first episode is more or less a copy and paste of the beginning of the game, and some people have some reasonable complaints about the contrasting animation styles. But overall, the action and the sense of desperation hooks you in the same way that the beginning of the game does. But things pick up significantly in episode 2. Which, in my opinion, is easily the best episode of the entire show. Episode 2 is a near-perfect microcosm of NieR Automata's unique style and substance. It had that perfect mixture of verbal storytelling and world-building, mixed with moments of silent introspection where all you hear is Keiichi Okabe and Monaka's immaculate musical score. On top of this, it also begins to set up a really cool mystery that incentivizes hardcore fans like myself to watch all the way to the end. Of course, I refer to the fact that the leader of the resistance against the machine lifeforms is an android named Lily, where in the game, the leader's name was Anemone. This is the first among many small changes to the game's story that subtly expand the world of the NieR universe in interesting ways and reward people who have studied the lore for years. I was so encouraged by episode 2, so much so that I thought to myself, if the rest of the anime is going to be on this level of quality, it won't only be one of the greatest video game adaptations, but one of the greatest adaptations of anything, period. It so clearly understood and preserved what made NieR Automata great, while also trying to craft its own identity. Unfortunately, the only time I ever felt the anime reached this height again was in the final episode. Everything between episode 2 and 24 feels like a very slow unraveling of a very strong start. But that's not to say that there isn't plenty of good. Episodes 3 through 5 maintain a solid pace and tone as it introduces beloved characters like Adam and Eve and Pascal, all while balancing an appropriate helping of action and some awesome callbacks to NieR Replicant. The only thing that I actively disliked about these episodes is the character Jackass, whose over-the-top slapstick humor felt tacked on and out of place in the majority of instances. It could have worked, especially because slapstick humor isn't foreign to the NieR universe. Plus, that's not to say that there weren't a few jokes that were pretty funny. In fact, there's a joke involving Jackass and a grenade in episode 8 that made me laugh out loud. But most of the time, it felt very out of place and annoying. But that's just me, and I'm sure there's plenty of people who found it charming. Though I did say that was the only thing I didn't like about episodes 3 through 5, there were a couple of things that weren't bad in and of themselves, but would become emblematic of a problem that would progressively reveal itself. I refer to the way the characters of Emile, Simone, and Jean-Paul were handled. Unlike the game, where Emile plays a part in a beautiful yet haunting side quest, Emile is more or less cut in the anime, where he becomes a lifeless head in a tree that the machines worship. Regarding Simone, her relationship to Jean-Paul and the existential breakdown she suffers because of him is condensed to a few symbolic flashes. At first, I was okay with both of these changes because with any form of adaptation, things are going to get cut for the sake of maintaining pace and focus. Though the anime undeniably loses much of the power of their respective storylines, what they did instead was at least interesting enough to make me say at the time, okay, that's fine, let's move on and see what they do instead. It wasn't until later that I would reflect on those changes negatively. But before I begin to fully dive into the negative, I do want to offer some big praise to episode 6, which introduces what is probably the strongest new element of the entire series. Here, we get to see a flashback to an older time when the Yorha androids and the Resistance teamed up. A time that is only hinted at in the game via text documents, but never depicted. This, alongside future episodes that depict this period of time, are relevant because they give us some extra time to emotionally invest in the character of Lily and, more importantly, with the character of A2. A2 was the best character in the game, and seeing how she came to be her brooding, world-weary self in the anime retroactively strengthened her character arc. Yet, despite this massive positive in the anime's favor, it too is not exempt from the aforementioned core issue that plagues every aspect of the anime's narrative: the pacing. Almost every time this anime features a dark moment or tries to induce reflection, it consistently felt muted because the anime was either trying to move too quickly to the next scene or episode, or because that moment gets offset by an inappropriate joke. And not in the way Drakengard 3 made inappropriate jokes, I mean it just didn't fit. Even with the stuff that we got with Lily and A2, which I felt was generally good, I kept thinking, man, if only we had another episode where the Resistance and the androids could cool their suspicions of one another and develop their bond, it could make their deaths and the subsequent feelings of loss have their maximum effect. Something that could actually match those intense feelings I felt playing the game. But due to the anime's time limit restrictions and an understandable marriage to the original story's structure, events and characterizations that should have had more emotional impact ended up relying more on explanation and exposition rather than feeling. Though the stuff with A2 and Lily was generally salvaged in this regard, I don't feel the same can be said for almost anybody else. The only possible exception is with 2B and 9S, but that mostly relies on the power of the original reveal regarding why 2B is always so emotionally distant to 9S. Aside from that, the progression of their relationship doesn't transition very well from the game to the anime in my opinion. The primary reason why is because the anime generally copies and pastes the story beats and dialogue while also ignoring what I like to call the Ico Effect. Now, the Ico Effect references the video game of the same name, where the main character Ico travels through a gigantic, mostly empty castle save for the occasional enemy, all while protecting Yorda, his female companion. The game fosters a strong bond between Ico and Yorda, but it doesn't do so through dialogue or story. Rather, it's mostly done by her mere presence, as she follows you throughout the difficult journey. Then, when you are separated or something bad happens to Yorda, you feel a surprisingly deep level of negative feeling. The same can be said for the attachment 9S has to 2B and vice versa in the game. It too has the Ico Effect. But unfortunately, the medium of gaming and anime are different. For the Ico Effect to work in the anime, you need to have more intense character development to suit a passive viewing experience. Thus, while I understood 2B's inner struggle and 9S's eventual bereavement on an intellectual level, I never really felt it on an emotional level like I did in the game. But what made it most difficult to find any emotional resonance with the anime was the negation of a majority of the game's existential philosophy. Don't get me wrong, some of it is there, like when Pascal, 2B, and 9S are floating through the sky in episode 7 when they're talking about the nature of the soul, or when Adam talks about humanity's superior complexity compared to aliens and machines in episode 9. But almost all of these moments come and go almost as quickly as they are introduced. Their darker implications cannot be explored and in turn cannot contribute to an expanding sense of existential dread because, again, the anime is so concerned with jumping to the next event from the game because they only have 24 episodes to work with. In turn, the game's strongest philosophical and emotional moments, like Pascal's despair over the death of the robot children, or Simone's breakdown over John Paul's disapproval, or the machine network's breakdown from overthinking, are either sped through or skipped entirely. The worst omission of all, though, in my opinion, was Emil's side quest. The quest to regain his memories, while also contending with the fact that he is one of many copies of the original Emil from NieR Replicant, would have not only greatly addressed the lack of emotion and philosophy, but done more to immerse newcomers in the world of NieR and make them want to seek out other media from the NieR universe. Ultimately, what we're left with is an adaptation that moves so fast that it can never establish a consistent sense of pace, mood, or give us time to emotionally connect with most of the characters. While this isn't too bad a problem in the first half of the anime, it gets exponentially worse in the second half, where all the events from the game alongside new events are so compressed that you get scenes that should be emotionally devastating happening right next to humorous scenes. Why is it that in episode 21, we see Lily contend with the emotionally devastating decision to put down one of her comrades, only for her other comrades to burst through the wall in their truck and start cracking jokes less than a minute later? Why is it that in episode 19, we watch 9S almost break down over the death of one of the Yorha members, and then a minute later we see the robot children asking A2 to take them to the bathroom? Yes, we see that type of vastly contrasting despair and humor in the game, but both those types of moments all had room to breathe. Here, it's like you're turning on Netflix and watching Apocalypse Now, and then stopping every few minutes and switching to The Naked Gun. No, really, it's that jarring. But thankfully, much of the second half is saved by the strength of A2's character arc, the revelations surrounding Yorha and 2B's primary function, and some cool callbacks to Drakengard and NieR. Even if those particular callbacks are largely delivered through inorganic exposition that feels forcefully stapled on to the main plot. But the best thing of all, as I said earlier on, is that the anime does end on a very strong note. It too is also a microcosm of what makes NieR Automata great, while doing enough things different to stand on its own as an anime. I loved how A2 and 9S's roles are reversed, where she's the one contemplating the beauty of the world and whether or not she should leave Earth on a spaceship. That was genuinely moving. And of course, I also loved the way that they presented ending E from the game not as a bullet hell where you shoot the credits, but as the pods fighting all the other pods to save 9S and 2B, in order to give them the ending that we collectively wanted to see them have since the game released in 2017. So, despite my numerous complaints, NieR Automata version 1.1a features just enough of that Yoko Taro-esque humor, philosophy, and charm that I can comfortably say that I didn't regret watching it, and found it to be entertaining in a number of spots. I would easily recommend it to all pre-existing fans. But still, under no circumstances should it be treated as an alternative to the game. Now I know, we're nearing the end of the video and you're probably wondering why I haven't addressed things like the waifu G-Man known as Accord showing up at the end of the anime, or the significance of her reports which are hidden in code in the middle of each episode. The reason why is that all that stuff and its relevance to upcoming games in the NieR universe is far too complicated to get into now. That said, if you want to see me do a video where I go into all of that, let me know in the comments section below. And while you're there, let me know what you guys thought of the anime. I'm especially curious to hear from somebody who watched the anime but didn't play the game. Until next time, remember to stay safe and stay yellow.